Welcome back. We are now in week 12. This is what the rest of our semester looks like. So we have our exam 3 this Friday. We get a break next week. Your essay is due that Wednesday, the 27th. It is due Wednesday because Thursday is Thanksgiving, and if I make your essay due Friday, I am 90% confident that a lot of you won't start it until Thursday or Friday, and I would rather not give you the opportunity to do that. I want you to spend time with your family for the holiday. So I'm just making it due Wednesday. I promise it'll be better for everybody. Our final homework 2, is due the week after that on Wednesday the 4th. This is also due on Wednesday because I'm going to upload the answers on Thursday, and I want you to have time to review the answers before the final. Fair warning, if you upload the homework after I've already uploaded the answers, I'm not going to give you credit for it. It's only 25 points. It's really not the end of the world. It's also because I'm not grading you on your correct answers, so waiting for the correct answers and then doing it is not helpful for you. I just don't see how that would benefit you. I grade these homeworks based on completion, so as long as you do it, as long as you try, you'll get full credit. But if you wait until I've already uploaded the answers, then clearly you're not making an effort at all. But then I will upload the correct answers. That way you can compare your answers and understand what you missed, if you missed anything, and study it more for the final. Our final is then the next Friday on December 13th. It will be the same as every other exam. You have no set time limit, but once you open it, you have to finish it. You can't stop it and try again. It will be proctored. You do have to be on video. It does have more questions, okay? So it has 85 questions, 2 points each. That makes 170 points total. However, if you look at the syllabus, if you look at the grade breakdown, there's 200 points, which means everyone right off the bat is just getting 30 points. I will add that to the final grade. So when you take the exam, it will give you your total out of 170. I'm just going to add 30 points to all of that when I do it manually. So you're getting 30 points right off the bat. It has 35 multiple choice questions. It has 10 true false, and then 10 of each of these. So 10 empirical normative, causation correlation, independent dependent, and 0 non-zero sum. Here's the thing. This is your final homework. I will then give you the answers to the final homework. All 5 of these questions are on the exam, which means if you know the content and you know the answers, you'll just have it. It'll just be given to you. So you're getting 30 free points off top, and then essentially you're getting 40 free points from the homework that I'm giving you the answers to. So it's 70 free points right off the top. There's also a couple of multiple choice questions that you can't get it wrong, in the way of there's only one option for you to pick and it's the right answer. So it looks like this. This is your exam 3 study guide. Sorry, hold on. Exams, final exam. Looks like this. There's only one answer. You only have one option to pick from. You can't get it wrong. So all of that being said, yes, the exam is longer. Yes, the exam is worth more points, but I have justified this because I feel like you're getting a lot of essentially free points as well. In terms of exam 3, this is your study guide. This has been on Brightspace, same as the final. It's been on Brightspace. You've had these for weeks. You've had them since the beginning of the semester, actually. Everything that's on the study guide is on the exam. You have the quizzes practice that you can use to study for the exam. You also have the slides. Everything on here except for class discussion is written explicitly in the slides. So you shouldn't be missing anything unless you're not looking at the slides or watching the lecture, which is, again, a required part of class. But as always, if you have questions, feel free to Discord or email me. That's your final homework. The last thing that you have to do is your second paper. This is your rubric, 1,300 words, 6 sources, answering these questions based on your assigned amendment. I feel like this is very easy. I feel like the expectations are laid out pretty clearly. I've already gotten a few rough drafts. People have already emailed me some questions. If I haven't gotten back to you yet, I will get back to you today. And that's it. That's it, guys. So exam 3 this Friday. Take a week off. I mean, you have a lecture that week, but there's no assignments. And then your essay, your final homework, and then the final exam. And that's all we have. Let me open. I'm still a little bit upset at this. So there's only 16 people in the class on quizzes, and only 7 of them have even attempted exam 3 prep. I mean, you do you. Maybe you have a different way to study. Maybe this isn't helpful for you. I'm not sure. But I'm just letting you know that it's here, that I can see. I'm not going to show you guys, but I can also just see who's done it. Like, I can see your name. So that's another prep option that's available to you. Other than that, we're going to get right into our lecture for this week, which is public opinion. So we're going to talk about public opinion, the role of it, what they are, where they come from, how it's measured, and then how citizenship and public opinion interact with voting and campaigns and all that kind of fun stuff. So the first thing we need to define is social science. So science, as I'm sure you know, is a concerted human effort to understand the natural world and how it works using observable physical evidence. Social science is a little different. It is a prediction of future outcomes or human behavior based on past behavior. So the main difference here is social science, or science, normal science, is observable very clearly, and it's often explanatory in some way. There are pieces of later science that are not explanatory, that are also predictions, but for our sake, it is explanatory, right? The apple fall from the tree, what happened? Social science is predicting something based on past behavior, right? You can't analyze the current behavior because you don't know what's happening, right? We don't know the result of the election until the election happens, but we can look at past behavior, past elections. We can use polling and determine a prediction for the election. So that's our main difference. And that's where polling comes in. Polling and public opinion, all of that is social science. I mean, all of it is social science, but very explicitly. So, I know there's a typo here. I know it's there. I'm going to ignore it. I hope you do too. The Holocaust. There's this statistic that goes around that 33% of Americans believe it did not happen. That's kind of crazy. People are using this they use it all the time to say that, oh, our education standards are so low and people don't trust anything and people don't know what happened and all of this. It's based on a study from 1992. The fact of the matter is that's not necessarily true because it was a bad question in polling. So this is the question. Does it seem possible or does it seem impossible to you that the Nazi extermination of the Jews never happened? There's a lot of discourse about why this is a bad question. A lot of it comes down to this double negative, right? So does it seem impossible that it never happened? Or does it seem possible that it never happened? So if you say it seems possible, you're really saying, I don't know if it happened or not. But if you say it seems impossible, technically, that would be the correct answer, right? If we're determining whether or not people think the Holocaust happened. The way the question is worded, generally, it's very bad. And if you just do a quick Google of this, you can see it. So there's a ton of this what was the bad question. There's New York Times articles about it, Washington Post stuff from the 1990s. There's this little article about it being a cautionary tale, and again, it's based on a very confusing version of a question. And they show you how the question should have been asked, and then what the results would have been otherwise. They conduct a 1994 study as well, and then they analyze the error. So this is very well known that this happened. If anyone ever presents this statistic to you, you know it's probably not very accurate. But this is the importance of polling, right? This is why polling is important, because this question, the bad wording of it and the researchers who conducted it did come out after the fact and acknowledge this was a bad question, our results weren't accurate, but the damage had been done, right? People had already thought this is what happened, and now this is a common sentence that people throw around to highlight a million different things, and it's just not accurate. Okay, this is why polling is so important, and how you conduct your polls is so important. Actually, we're getting into normative and empirical now. So after this week, you'll have everything you need to do your final homework. So there's two kinds of scientific studies. There's normative studies and empirical studies. Normative studies are judgmental. So they're looking at what should be or how the world ought to look. A normative judgment would be, our country is the best in the world, right? And that is normative because it's a judgment, and you can't necessarily prove it. There's a million different ways you could measure this. A lot of them will probably contradict. It depends on what your idea of best is. Is it because of how much money you make, or is it because of how much education you have, or is it because a million different factors, right? Where you live, how much crime there is, how many people are in prison, how many people have gotten sick, how many people are in hospitals. All of these different factors could fall into what you think the best in the world really means. There's not a good measurement for that. Empirical is what can be proven. So it is a fact, right? So if you were to say, our country has the greatest GDP in the world, or the largest GDP in the world, that can be measured factually. It's either true or it's not true. The key difference here is what can be proven and how specific it is, right? If you say, I think our country is the best in the world because we have the largest GDP, that is still normative based on fact, because someone else might think that the country is the worst because of our education level or our voter turnout, right? But there is an empirical part of that. And the empirical part is what can be measured. It is the fact. So that's the next part of your homework. Determining whether statements are normative or empirical. Politics obviously involves both, right? So the president is doing a great job. Normative. Congress is useless. Also normative. In the 2020 election, Biden beat Trump by 10,988 votes in Arizona. That is empirical, right? You can see whether or not that is true. All of our scientific studies and social science, not all of, a lot of them, especially when we're looking at elections and predicting election results, is going to be based on opinion polls. opinion polls are estimating public opinion. So here is just an example of an opinion poll looking at whether or not there should be a ban on handguns. And again, you can see like the percent that goes up or goes down or in the year, and you have percent-wise over here. And it's just a public opinion. So from this poll, right, you would say, yeah, majority of Americans think handguns should not be banned. The complications come in that there are dozens of different actors and researchers and political scientists who are conducting and putting out these polls, and they're all getting different answers. And so it's really dependent on not necessarily more than who the poll was, like who the poll sampled and what the question was and how many people answered, but just who's giving the poll, right? And maybe you look at 10 different polls and average them, and you get a result based on that. But there are a lot of issues with public opinion polling, and we'll talk about that in a minute. The thing about public opinion is that there's two, factors of it. The first factor is why it should matter, and the second one is why it actually does. Similar to the whole media tells you what to think about, not what to think kind of thing. So it should matter because our government, the legitimacy of our government, rests on whether people believe the government is serving them. So if people do not believe that, our government is losing legitimacy. However, it does matter actively because politicians are acting as though they believe the public is keeping tabs on them, right? So if voting for a bill is going to lower your public opinion, you may not vote for it, right? If they think that the public opinion is going to hold them accountable to how they're acting, then they'll respond like that. Both of these things can be true at the same time. I'm going to go over this just a little bit because I don't think it's quite as applicable as the other content. But there's a difference between a personal public opinion and a collective public opinion. Individuals are generally pretty uninformed on issues in public policy, and personal opinions can often be contradictory and lacking detail because there are just so many things, right? There are so many things that people have opinions on. There are so many things that government does. There are so many categories of policy that needs to be passed. And it's just difficult for every person to have such a collected version, of all of their views that all will add up together and work together, right? And this is that's why the president and that's why our Congress members have cabinets. They have people who advise them, they have people who write the bills, and they have people who specialize in things other than they do, because it's unreasonable to expect that all of our politicians know everything about everything. It is also unreasonable to expect that of citizens. This is not to say it's a problem. This is just to say people are often very strongly convicted in their opinions. But if you go a little further, you'll find that a lot of times your opinions don't have the same line depending on the topic you're asking about. The collective personal opinion is based on our larger personal opinion, right? And we often see this enacted through elections. Whether people get elected or they do not is indicative of their collective personal public opinion. This is just a fun little statistic that came out in 2016, maybe late 2016, right before the election. And it was basically that 19% of Americans think Hillary Clinton is an actual demon. Number one, this is a good example of other bad polling questions. It doesn't specify whether they mean actual demon in the terms of like they literally think she is the demon, or if they just think the way that she acts and the policies she's going to implement are actions of a demon, like whether she is physically a demon or not. You still don't really know what the question is asking. But generally speaking, I just thought it was a funny statistic that came out of the 2016 election. The most important gauge of public opinion is a president's approval ratings. And again, despite this like general lack of knowledge on all politics and all policies and all things, Americans are totally willing to offer their opinions on all of the things, even if they don't really know what's going on. This is a little old. I need to update this. I'll pull up an approval rating as well. But this is all the approval ratings of all presidents at day 69. Day 69 is usually a really good market for when they take these public opinion polls. They take public opinion polls on the president every single day. Sorry for my loud typing. So here are all of the approval of presidents. So in Biden's first 100 days, he was at 57. JFK had one of the highest approval ratings ever. Right around in the 50s to 60s is pretty average. And again, when I tell you they take these every single day, they take these every single day or every other day. So this is Biden's approval rating right now. Most people disapprove. You can scroll it back and see right when he was inaugurated, he had a pretty high approval rating. His approval rating downturned at right between August and September. So you can think back to what was happening then. But yeah, public opinion of the president is very, very important. It is a large indicator of how the government is doing and how people are engaging with the government, and that is why it is taken almost every single day. How do you take, right? So now we're going to talk about how we're measuring public opinion. There are a lot of different types of polling. I'm only going to give you 3. But there are other kinds. So the first one is phone polls, which are usually most common. They're starting to be less common now, though, because they're very, very cheap to do. However, they were a lot easier when people had landlines, and now that everyone has cell phones and caller ID, it is very, very difficult to get people to answer the phone. And then once they find out you're taking a survey, they'll probably hang up on you. These are pretty difficult to do, but they are very, very cheap, and they can be done pretty quickly. The other type of poll that's super important are exit polls, which are done at polling locations on election day. So people will go in and they will vote, and then after they vote, they will oftentimes be asked a bunch of questions. A lot of demographic questions, a lot of questions about issues they care about, and maybe even who they voted for. The issue with exit polls is that oftentimes people will lie because you're face to face with them, because they want to leave, because they really don't want to do it and they feel cornered. They're just going to lie. This is not like every person, but it is common enough that it should be represented. And the third one I want to tell you about are polls conducted via social media. And these are also very easy to do. They're very quick. I'm so sorry. The issue is that they're not very scientific and they're not very random. And it is really, really difficult to determine what the collective public opinion is if you're only getting personal opinions from people who have a very, very strong stake in the game. It's similar to why it's difficult to look at restaurant reviews on Yelp, right? Because most people are only going to leave a review if they had a terrible time. Same thing with social media polls. Most people are only going to participate if they really, really love the administration or if they really, really hate the administration. And you're not going to be able to get a representative sample. You're also not going to be able to capture those people who may feel some way in the middle. First polls, a little bit of history. I'm going to go through this quick. The first polls were in the newspaper, and then it moved to phones. And the early days were also not very representative because only wealthy people had phones. However, as technology increased, so too did polling. The issue, again, is we are still unsure if the results are ever really representative. The type of poll you're conducting will have biases. The people themselves will have biases. The people might lie for some reason. You might have a bad question that isn't representative of how people truly feel. There's just a lot of things that could go wrong, right? How much money you have to conduct the poll could be a factor that impacts your outcome. Where you're conducting the poll at. How many people are answering, if they choose to answer at all. There's a million ways that polling could go wrong, and that's why it's difficult to measure, and it's difficult to use as an indicator of total collective opinion. It's also difficult to use to predict future behavior. However, we do try to use them to estimate what a group thinks by sampling a portion of the whole. Obviously, we can't ask every single person in the United States what they think of the president. It's not feasible. People won't answer. It's too expensive. There's a million reasons you can't do it. So what you do is you take a sample, and the sample is supposed to be a representation of the entire population. If we're surveying all of the United States, we need a sample, right? So maybe our sample will be people that we perceive represent the rest of the United States. The key for sampling is that it has to be random. If it's not random, it's not representative, right? If you only pick your friends, they're probably going to have the same opinions that you do. And if that's the case, they don't represent the entire country, right? If you post it on Twitter and only people who are very, very upset with the administration are responding, that's not going to be representative of the entire U.S. population. So in order to be random, the respondents need to be chosen randomly, and they have to have the same chance of being chosen as anybody else in the entire United States. And if they're not random, the sample is not representative. That doesn't necessarily mean that we can't gain some type of insight from it, but it does mean we can't say 70% of Americans are approving of the way that Biden is handling the presidency, right? It's not representative. You don't know that. Where we see this actual impact is in something called the sample error. The sample error is the measure of reliability and accuracy in the poll. What this really breaks down to being is the difference between the actual population and the sample. The larger sample you have, the lower, smaller sampled error you have. So if default number, the best case scenario for a lot of people is looking at about 1,500 respondents, because this gives you a sample error of plus or minus 3%. The cost benefit of this is why most people think it's the best solution. So going up in more respondents doesn't change the sample error by that much more to be worth the cost of doing it. So sorry. There is a crisis happening. Sorry if you can hear the sirens. So the sweet spot is right around 1,500 responders, which gives you an error of plus or minus 3%. What this means is if you sample 1,500 people, okay, and I'm going to use this selection as an example. I know for some people it was amazing, for some people it wasn't. I'm just going to use that as an example. If you sample 1,500 people, okay, and you get a result that 52% of people prefer for President Trump to be reelected. Your sample error is 3%, which means it could go all the way down to 48%, which could be really poor because in that case, Harris would win the election. Or it could go all the way up to 55%, which would be a clean break, right? So even though the sample error is still pretty low, depending on where you're at, it could be very, very detrimental to the results that you're trying to predict. There are other complications with polling. There are dozens more than this, but I'm only going to give you these 4. I think these 4 are the most important. So the first one is a response differential, which is when the sample is not representative, right? So if you don't have a random sample, that's a response differential. If I were to ask people if they understand how government works, or I'm trying to sample all high school students, and I ask whether or not they think they know how the government works, but my sample is only students in my class, that's not representative, because obviously students in my class would have more of an idea of how the government works than students who are not in my government class. Response differential. Bias is another one. Bias happens in a ton of different ways. Oftentimes, it is the scientist who is changing or adjusting the samples or data mining. It's also called p-hacking. The third one is bluffed response, which is just when people are lying to you. And then the fourth one is question error. So like the Holocaust question, right? Like it's just a bad question. And people who are answering it don't understand it. And then when you're going back through your data, you might not know how to interpret it. So you might get bad results. Polling setbacks, I'm just going to give you a couple examples of them. The first one is this like most famous one. When Harry Truman won the presidential election in 1948. However, there were dozens of polling and all kinds of things that said that Thomas Dewey was actually going to win the election. So a bunch of people, Chicago Daily Tribune is the one here, printed out papers to go out the day after the election saying that Dewey defeated Truman. That obviously did not get to be the case. So all these papers were being sent out the day after the election and saying the new president was going to be Thomas Dewey, and that just wasn't true. Clearly they were wrong, and it led to a lot of confusion. It took a couple of days to clear up. It was a whole thing. And I'm seeing sometimes people are still looking at this now, and they're saying, oh, like there was a leak of a data page that said that Harris was going to win the election, and that means that it was rigged. It's probably right. Like, it's the same thing that's happening here. A lot of the polling did suggest that that was going to be the outcome of the election. So in order to try to save time, they would have a paper that said that. And then if they accidentally released it, that would be massive news. Thankfully they didn't. It got leaked. And oftentimes what will happen is you'll see them do both. So they'll have, especially after this Dewey defeats Truman debacle, now they'll have both. So they'll have a front page that says Dewey defeats Truman, and they'll have a front page that says Truman defeats Dewey. And they'll just prepare both. That way they're ready for whichever outcome there is. You see campaigns do this a lot too, where they'll prep like concession statements and they'll prep succession statements, and then they just decide which one to put out. So if you see this happening now, there are some conspiracy theories around it. I think you should default to this, right? That there was a polling setback, or it was the campaigns preparing for either outcome, because it's one of those things where it's one or the other. You either win or you don't. It's very easy to prepare for either one of these. This whole vaccines and autism thing was another example of how misinformation can be spread and how data can be manipulated. So, and the detriment of that. So there was a 1998 publication of research in the UK, right? Did not happen in the US. That was looking into the MMR vaccine and whether or not it was causing autism. Andrew Wakefield was the scientist in this study, and he published a study saying, yeah, the MMR vaccine causes autism. It came out, this was a whole big thing. Even though it was only conducted in the UK, people started believing it applied everywhere else in the US and in Canada. And then what you do in science, right, is you replicate. That's why you're supposed to give all of your data and produce all of your results so people can replicate your study. Well, multiple scientists then looked into this and they said, oh, that's interesting. We're going to do his study. So they did the exact same thing that Andrew Wakefield did. Sometimes they did it with more respondents. They, after multiple runs, found no causation link. They said, oh, what happened? When that happens, it's called peer review. So peer review is when they will replicate your study or they'll review all of your data just to signify that what you did was correct and what you did means something. So they did this. They couldn't find any causal link. So they started looking into his data. And it turns out that he had gone through and manipulated his own data. So however he was taking it, whether that was scores or on his coding, whatever it was, he manipulated it. He was changing answers to get the results that he wanted, to make this big causal claim and publish this study that was going to make him a household name. After it was found out that he manipulated evidence, the research was retracted, his license was taken away, but as a lot of people know, this damage has already been done. A lot of people still believe this. And they believe this, and they don't know, maybe they do, maybe they just don't care, but a lot of people just don't know that this study was fake. And so they'll point to it and say, well, studies say, and it's yeah, but it's one study that was shown to be wrong. And the impact, not only, right, the downfall of this is how you can manipulate data, and that sometimes scientists do manipulate data, but it's how it can impact you, because it impacts a lot of people every day, even nearly 30 years after it happened. Okay, we're almost done. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about research, what research is. It's just the science of collecting, exploring, and presenting large amounts of data to look at these underlying patterns and trends, right? So you're doing research into vaccines. You're doing research into who do you think is going to win the election. You're doing research into public opinion polls. All this kinds of stuff is all based on research. And in order to do research, you need to be able to set up your independent and your dependent variable. And this is the next section on your final homework that is on your final exam. Your independent variable, for our sake, these get a little complicated later, but I'm going to make them very simple now. Your independent variable is the cause, and your dependent variable is what changed. Right, so penicillin kills bacteria. The number of bacteria in your body is the dependent variable. It's changing. Penicillin is the independent variable. It is what causing the change. Cigarettes give you cancer. That's another one, right? Whether or not you have cancer is the dependent variable. Whether or not you smoke cigarettes is the independent variable. I'm going to talk about our homework real quick before I go to the last slide. This applies to all of these things, okay? Whether or not the statement is true does not matter. Don't think about it. I just want you to tell me what I'm asking you. Okay? So if I'm asking you, a person becomes fit, or the wearing of masks prevents one from getting COVID. Okay, whether or not that's true, whether or not you think that's true, whether or not that's a fact, doesn't matter. I just want you to answer the question as if the statement I'm telling you is true. So COVID-19 is the what? Same thing here. Bigfoot sightings increase as unemployment increases. Does that happen? I don't know. Is Bigfoot real? I don't know. I don't care about that. I just want you to answer the question, okay? I'm just trying to get you to answer the question. The United States is a higher percent. This is a great one. The U.S. has a higher voter turnout than Iceland. That's just straight up not true. That's a lie, okay? The U.S. does not have a greater percentage of voter turnout. But I don't care about that. I want you to tell me whether it's empirical or normative. Hint, it's empirical because it can be studied. Even if the answer here is no, it's still an empirical study because it can be measured. And for our last slide, I'm going to talk about our last thing on our homework, which is causation and correlation. Independent-dependent variable, not the same thing as causation correlation. Whether vaccines cause autism, he manipulated the data, okay? This is a complete fraudulent study. Even if his results had been true, it could have been correlation and not causation. So what does that mean? Causation is indicating one event is the result of another. Cause and effect, right? If you drop an apple, it will hit the ground. That is a cause. Dropping something makes it hit the ground. Correlation is a statistical measure looking at the size and direction of a relationship between two variables. Okay, so the best example of this is something like shark attacks increase as people eat more ice cream. Or the other way around, ice cream consumed increases with shark attacks. Does that mean that ice cream immediately causes you to be attacked by a shark? Or being attacked by a shark means that more people are eating ice cream? No. Right, this is happening because in the summer, more people are eating ice cream. Also in the summer, more people will get attacked by sharks because they're swimming in the ocean. These things are not related at all, other than their correlation, which is based on outside factors. Okay, these are called confounders. I'm not going to get into that, but it's based on things that are not related. Causation is when one thing immediately causes another. So, back to, let's look at our homework, okay? Now that we've gone through all of this, I'm going to take a minute before I end the lecture and go through some examples. Pollution is a serious problem. Normative, okay? Pollution may be a serious problem, but this is a judgment statement. If you were to say the hole in the ozone layer is double the size what it was 10 years ago, that would be empirical. But whether or not it's a problem is normative, because some people don't think it is at all. Causation correlation. We already did a couple of these. Medical technology increase during times of war. This one causes a lot of debate, usually. Because on one hand, right, it's probably correlation. On the other hand, some people have made the argument that because we are in times of war, people are getting injured more, medical technology might increase. I can see the argument. However, I would also be willing to say that people who are helping injured soldiers probably don't have the time to work on new technology. Maybe they're doing it at home, right? But this is not indicative of exactly what is causing the medical technology increase. This is correlation. Mayor Horrigan takes office and road construction increases. This is causation, right? The mayor directly affects this, which means when the mayor changes and then something else changes that the mayor affects, you can bank on the fact that the mayor changed that. Independent, dependent. Ohio voted for every U.S. president until Biden beat Trump. This is true. So until 2020, whoever won Ohio, this is not to say Ohio caused the winning, it's to say Ohio predicted, right? So Biden is the what? I'm going to leave it open for you guys. Biden is the dependent variable. It's the change. And then zero, non-zero sum game. Rock, paper, scissors. This is also has been a bit of controversy. So I will leave that one for the homework and then give you the answers after the fact. A game of chess. A zero sum, right? If I take your piece, you don't have that piece anymore. That piece is gone. I took it. That's zero sum. So there are a couple of your examples. There's your final homework. There is your public opinion lecture. And we are good for the week. So remember that your exam is on Friday. Email me or Discord me with questions. Please join the quiz. Please use your study guide. Please look at the slides. Please watch the lectures. Yeah. And I will see you next week.